and how their career, future career, will actually impact the world that we live in. So I thank you all for the invitation to be here today, and look forward to learning more from the global scholars.
Thank you so much, Ben. Our next speaker will be Beth Hudson. You can stand there if you want to.
I'll just stay right here. I wasn't planning to speak, but I'm a social studies specialist for the Austin district, and there's nothing quite so gratifying for an educator than to learn from students. So I'm pleased to be here, and thank you for including me.
Okay. Maybe tell the people that may not know, tell us a little bit about your background and what you've done so far, because I know it's very strong in this. Yeah. And don't be modest.
Well, a couple of years ago, I encountered the Genocide Education Project at the Texas Council for Social Studies, and I got very interested. And I have worked with them and Mirhan and some of the other people here, and we've been involved in a number of things and putting together some professional development for teachers. And then they honored me with an award in California about a month ago, which was pretty wonderful.
That's very good. Okay. Very good job. And now we'll hear from Mirhan. Mirhan, I've known probably for about 12 years now or so, I guess.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Can I borrow your HDMI cord from here? So
you might have to help him out.
My name is Mirhan Aorian, and I'm used to giving lectures for about an hour and a half. So just bear with me. I won't give you the full hour and a half here. But I did want to show you a few things. Let's see if we can get this to come up. Sometimes I run into little challenges with, oh, look at that. Are we all familiar with Murphy's Law? Well, oftentimes when I'm using equipment like this, I run into what I call as O'Brien's Law. Anyone know what O'Brien's Law is? O'Brien's Law said that Murphy was an optimist. Oh, please, how about a little cooperation? There we go. Okay, so what I want to do, first of all, is, we'll go the other way. So the Armenian word for Armenia is Hayastan, and this is in the Armenian script up above here. And I want to just show you a couple of images, primarily to demonstrate how long Armenia has been around. It's been around for a long time. A number of years ago, they discovered this winery in Aorian, and it dates back to about 6,000 years, 6,000 years old. This is the oldest known shoe in the world. It dates back about 5,500 years and still looks in miraculous shape. You can even see the Nike logo on the bottom. I want to, and this is a word that clearly you all have been studying here quite a bit, genocide, and it was coined by a Polish attorney, Raphael Lemkin. And in Greek, genos is race or people, and side is the act of killing. You're familiar with things like pesticides and herbicides. Those are all meant to kill. And one of the things that Raphael Lemkin worked on was the international recognition of this term genocide, and also the significance of what genocide means. So Turkey, as I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit about here, has worked very hard on not recognizing the Armenian genocide. As Mike said earlier, it is a crime in Turkey to discuss the Armenian genocide. They regularly threaten foreign governments. They persecute Armenian descendants that live in Turkey today. They have assassinated various activists, Hrant Dink being one of the most famous Armenians that was assassinated. They do pay U.S. lobby firms and academics in academia to support their denialist claims. And still today, they continue to destroy historic Armenian buildings. There are 30 countries that do recognize the Armenian genocide. You'll notice that there are three prominent ones that do not. That's the United States, UK, and Turkey. Just so that you at least can put this in perspective, not all of the countries in the world recognize the Jewish Holocaust either. And that is hard to believe in this day and age. One of the things that I think it's important to recognize is the geographic location of where Armenia is. So you'll notice that Azerbaijan and Iran and Turkey make up three of their four neighbors. Those three neighbors are Muslim, Armenia being a Christian nation. Here in the United States, that may not mean a whole lot, but in that part of the world, it has important significance to their survival with their neighbors. They've been at war with one of their neighbors over the centuries, over and over and over again. This is the oldest Armenian church in Armenia. It dates back to the year 303. I don't know if we have dirt in the United States that dates back to 303, but this also happens to be the main cathedral within Armenia that represents the religious aspects of Armenian life all throughout the world. And it's been restored and modernized, but it was begun in the year 303. Just to put things into a little different perspective, so this is one of my favorite monasteries to visit. It's called Noravank, Nor meaning new, Vank meaning monastery. So it's the new monastery, which was built in the 13th century. That's how new things are in Armenia. You'll notice those steps to get up into the church are probably not approved by the American Disabilities Act. There's no railing, they're quite steep. And it is built literally in the middle of nowhere. And to me, to look at something like that and say, how in the world did they build that in the 13th century? Never mind trying to build it today, but we're talking about building it many, many years ago. So this is Tsitsenakabert, which is an awfully big, complicated word that simply means or translates to swallow's nest. So this is the Armenian memorial to the genocide in Armenia. The large spire here, you can see there's sort of two elements to it. It represents both the eastern part of Armenia and the western part of Armenia. The separating element of the east and west is Mount Ararat. And does anyone know the significance of Mount Ararat? That's where Noah's Ark supposedly resides. The memorial itself has got these 12 slats that represent the 12 regions of historic Armenia. And on April 24th, the eternal flame is always run, but you can see the literal pile of flowers that go around the memorial. You can see the tops of people up there, but we're talking literally they're like 6 feet tall. Well, no, hold on, they're Armenians, so it's probably about 5 feet tall. And when you go through the museum, and I just picked out one or two pictures, you see a lot of before and after pictures of the different villages that occur in historic Armenia or Eastern Turkey today. And you'll notice that sort of in the after pictures, anyone happen to notice like what still is remaining? Can you see what still looks like it's remaining?
Church.
They're mosques. They're mosques.
How lots of them?
A few years ago, I had an opportunity to go visit where my father's side of the family had come from in Eastern Turkey. It's in a little village called Husenik, and we actually have maps of the region so we know where the different family plots were. And I'm holding, so my grandmother actually lived here on this plot of land, and I'm holding a photograph of my dad who was standing in that exact same spot about 20 years before me. So it had a lot of emotional significance for me to be where my grandmother had been born. And as you travel through Turkey, you see lots of evidence of churches falling apart. So the word Armenian, Ermani in Turkish, is rarely used. So very rarely will you ever see the word Armenian being used. In fact, in many parts of Turkey, they deny that there were even any Armenians that lived in that region. This happens to be one of those regions where they deny that there were any Armenians that actually lived there. Yet on this sign, on this memorial, it says this monument was built for the remembrance of the Turks slaughtered in 1918 by the Armenians in this village. So I asked the person that was taking us on this tour, I said, how is it that there were no Armenians that lived here, yet they're responsible for massacring the Turks that lived in this village? Well, we didn't have a very good answer. This is the Ani Cathedral in eastern Turkey. It's actually right on the border. So the Arax River is right in back of it, and on the other side is actually Armenia today. If the border was not guarded by Russian troops, Turkey would probably continue their takeover of Armenia, but it's because of Russia that Turkey has not crossed over that little river. The Ani Cathedral is over 1,000 years old. The name Ani comes from the city of 1,001 churches. And you can see a lot of it has been whitewashed inside of the church. You can see some of the disciples here, for example, but it's all been whitewashed. And it just will decay over the years. So why learn about the Armenian Genocide? And I'm almost done because I know we're trying to be very conscious of time. First of all, it's a very significant human rights event from World War I. It is certainly considered a prototype for genocides that were to come after the Armenian Genocide. In fact, there was a lot of technology that was used during the Armenian Genocide that became very important later on. It's also important to understand the effects of what genocide has done even 100 years later. I mean, why are we still having this conversation? Life in the Ottoman Empire was very difficult, especially if you were not Turkish. Armenians and other minorities were second-class citizens. They paid higher taxes. They had restricted legal rights, and they had limits to what they could actually own. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about the three perpetrators here shortly. The Young Turks came into power after overthrowing the Sultan, and they developed a new nationalism that they called Pan-Turkism, which was that Turkey should only be for Turks and anyone else should be removed, of which the Armenians were one of those. The Armenians were deported, they were massacred, they were killed, they were sent through the deserts. And we have several eyewitnesses, one of them being Ambassador Morgenthau, who wrote eyewitness accounts. He was the US ambassador to Turkey. The United States actually was very helpful towards helping the relief efforts over there. The Near East Relief Fund raised over $116 million, which today would be well over $1 billion, to help take care of the hundreds of thousands of orphans in the region. In fact, this is a photograph taken in Gyumri, what is modern day Gyumri, from 1918 of the orphans thanking the United States for their financial support. Just very briefly on Turkey's denial tactics, they clearly do not want to deal with the truth. They will often say that it was the Armenians that committed the crimes. They will want to diminish the numbers that you'll probably hear about here shortly. They blame often natural forces. You know, during World War I, there was famine, there was disease. They blame the victims often, that we had these Armenians who were disloyal to the Ottoman Empire. They also claim that what happened does not fit within the legal definition of genocide. And one of the things that they do most often with foreign governments is that they'll use the Armenian Genocide as a bartering chip to say, look, you don't really want to harm our relationship, so let's not talk about it. In 2015, there were 130,000 Armenians that lined the streets of Los Angeles. So one of the largest demonstrations in the world. And as I'm sure we'll hear about shortly, there's a famous quote by Adolf Hitler as he was getting ready to enter into Poland when he was asked, how is it you think that you can get away with what you are about to do? And his quote was, who remembers the annihilation of the Armenian people? Just a little bit about what's happened here in Texas. So it was 2 years ago today, not coincidental, that that we had a public hearing at the Texas State Capitol. And on May 19th, there was a vote of the Armenian Genocide Resolution. There were 137 votes for it, and there were no votes against it. There was a major act that occurred in December, this past December, with the Texas Education Agency, which I won't go into detail. And then we have representatives here from the Texas Commission on Holocaust and Genocide that added the Armenian Genocide to their roster as well. And with that said, thank you.
Now we'll hear from our commissioner, Mr. Wolfson.
Good afternoon. The Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission was created by an act of the state legislature and was signed into law by then Governor Rick Perry back in 2009. On that day, nearly 10 years ago, state politicians, leaders in education, and survivors joined forces to recognize the importance of these subjects to all of us here in Texas. We now have 15 commissioners spread throughout the state. Along with our office staff, and I'm staff, not a commissioner, and we have 3 other staff members here in the room with us today. We're located at the Capitol complex here in Austin. Our commissioners work towards the common goal of conveying that on any day, the ethical choices all of us make as individuals and as a nation will shape history and the way future generations remember us. Education is our chief mission. That is, we teach Texans about the darkest moments in human history. The study of genocide amounts to a recognition of the most egregious assaults on human life, as well as on telling the truth. It is no accident that wherever genocidal regimes target groups for persecution and mass murder, they also take control of educational systems, distort young people's understanding of history, and harshly restrict artistic and intellectual freedoms. Atrocities against innocent people are frequently preceded by an assault on the right to learn, to ask the questions we want to ask, to draw conclusions based on facts we should feel free to investigate. When a society intentionally hides the facts, it becomes much likelier to spread hateful, false accusations against the innocent. When people believe lies, even after a genocide has occurred, they are likely to confuse cruelty and ignorance with justice. In such an environment, genocide denial, as we just heard, can flourish. Nobody knows this better than the Armenian community today. As genocide survivors will tell you, the ability to distinguish between right and wrong and the willingness to act on behalf of our neighbors and even on behalf of strangers can sometimes be a matter of life or death when they are systematically targeted for persecution and mass murder simply because of their religion, ethnicity, race, and/or nationality. The THGC provides a clear educational vision that is meant to help Texans see history's relevance to their own lives and today's world events, so that all human life has value. With that in mind, the Commission stands with you today in saying that the study of the Armenian Genocide has a rightful place in education throughout our state. Thank you.
Now we're going to have a demonstration of some really, I think, cutting edge curriculum here. Emma?
This is going to be a demonstration of I would do first speak and my partner would do second. May it please the court, Your Honor. My partner Freddy Nieto and I, Emma Castro, will represent the people in the case of International Criminal Court versus Mehmet Shah. Your Honor, many people may be wondering, why have a trial now? Didn't this take place almost 100 years ago? To answer this question, we would like you to have a look at the words of former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who made a statement in response to a question regarding the administration's refusal to recognize the Armenian Genocide on January 26, 2012. She stated, "This has always been viewed, and I think properly so, as a matter of historical debate." Your Honor, this is not a matter of historical debate. This is a matter of mass murder, and more importantly, a matter of time to put this all to rest. It's a perfect time to prosecute Mehmet Shah for 14 different crimes. These include 4 counts of genocide, Article 6, A, B, C, E, with 6 counts of crimes against humanity, Article 7, A, B, C, D, E, H, and with 4 counts of war crimes, Article 8, A1, 2, 3, 4, and B2. Now, there are at least 8 official documents and orders signed by Mehmet Shah, Minister of the Interior, that directly tie him to the genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity concerning his role in the decimation of the Armenian population from March 1915 to January of 1916. The first, dated March 25, 1915, to Dijamal Bey, Delegate Hudson. In our dispatch dated February 18th, we announced that Dejiment has decided to uproot and annihilate the different forces for which centuries have been a hindrance for the purpose it is forced to resort to very bloody methods. The second, dated September 3rd, 1915, to the prefecture of Aleppo, include the women and children also in these orders. The third, dated September 16th, to the prefecture of Aleppo. The government has decided to destroy completely all the indicated persons living in Turkey. No regard must be paid to either age or sex. The fourth, dated November 18th, 1915, to the prefecture of Aleppo. It is most important that foreigners who are in these parts shall be convinced that the expulsion of the Armenians is in reality only deportation. The fifth, entitled, dated December 11th, 1915, to the prefecture of Aleppo. Armenian journals are requiring photographs and letters which depict tragic events, and then they give these to the American consul at Aleppo. Dangerous people of this kind must be arrested and suppressed. The sixth, dated December 29th, 1915, to the prefecture of Aleppo. We are informed that foreign officers are finding along the roads the corpses of the indicated persons and are photographing them. Have these corpses buried at once and do not allow them to be left near the roads. The seventh, dated January 15th, 1916, to the governor of Aleppo. The government will view the feeding of such children or any effort to prolong their lives as an act completely opposite to its purpose, since it regards the survival of these children as detrimental. The eighth, dated 1916, from the Minister of the Interior to the governor of Aleppo. Only those orphans who cannot remember the terrors to which their parents have been subjected must be collected and kept. Send the rest away with the caravans. There are 2 identified documented conversations that directly deal with the Armenian Genocide. First, a personal conversation with Dr. Mortman of the German embassy on June 1915, wherein Mehmet Shah said, "Turkey is taking advantage of the war in order to thoroughly liquidate its internal foes, i.e. the indigenous Christians, without being thereby disturbed by foreign interventions." The second was in 1918, after the German ambassador persistently brought up the Armenian question. Shah responded with a smile, "What on earth do you want? The question is settled. There are no more Armenians." Now, my argument is that Mehmet Shah is guilty of 4 counts of genocide according to Article 6 of A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. A charge of genocide under the Rome Statute Article 6A includes killing members of the group, in this case being the Armenians, and evidence can be found in the following documents and statements. Now, the first document is dated September 16th to the prefecture of Aleppo. The government has decided to completely destroy all the indicated persons living in Turkey. Their existence must come to an end, however tragic the means may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex. This can also be seen in a circular order on April 24th, 1915, that was signed by Mehmet Shah, Minister of the Interior, ordering the beginning of the Armenian Genocide. It reads, "The immediate closing down of the branches of committees, as well as the similar organizations in the capital and in other provinces, seizing of all the documents and materials without any losses, arresting the leaders and members of the committees, of the people who have kept and taken part in the activities, of the Armenians who are well known by police forces, gathered the suspicious people in the area, in the town, so as to prevent their escape, and launching of research for weapons in suitable places have been found appropriate." Now, more evidence of Mehmet Shah's involvement can be seen in the testimony of the Turkish Military Tribunal in 1919 at Constantinople, the complicity of civilian and military authorities. On page 5, Mr. who was sent to Aleppo brought the court's attention that the intent of the deportations was obstructed, as admitted to him by A. Neri with the words, "I contacted Mr. Talat and personally received the orders of extermination." And although it has never been officially recognized by the US, a few trials did take place before the Turkish court martial in Istanbul on the basis of Articles 45 and 170 of the Ottoman Penal Code. The Young Turk leaders Mehmet Pasha, Minister of the Interior, and Enver Pasha, Minister of War, were tried in absentia and convicted. The trials provided further evidence of the various aspects of genocide against the Armenians. The accused were found guilty in the judgment on July 5th of 1919 of the organization and execution of the crime of massacre against the Armenian population. Now, moving to the next charge, a charge of genocide under the Rome Statute Article 6 states that because he caused serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, the Armenians. Now, evidence for violation of Article 6b can be found in the written documents from Mehmet Pasha, dated September 16th to the prefecture of Aleppo. Their existence must come to an end, however tragic the means may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex. Now, this evidence for violation of Article 6b shows that Mehmet Pasha ordered the destruction of the Armenian people and ordered that the real intent was covering up with the alleged deportations. November 18, 1915, to the prefecture of Aleppo. In view of our present policy, it is most important that foreigners who are in these parts shall be convinced that the expulsion of the Armenians is in reality only deportation. Moving forward, a charge of genocide under the Rome Statute, Article 6 states that because he inflicted on the Armenians conditions of life calculated to bring about his physical destruction in whole or in part, and evidence for this violation can be seen in the written documents from Mehmet Pasha. In the ambassador's 1918 book, Ambassador Morgenthau's Story, in chapter 25, Telet tells why he deports the Armenians. Morgenthau explains, when the reports came, the tendency was at first to disregard them as mere manifestations of the disorders that prevailed in the Armenian provinces for many years. When more reports came, Turkish officials declared that they were nothing more than a mob uprising which they would soon have under control. I see now that this was not apparent. It was clearly the intention that Europe and America should hear of the annihilation of the Armenian race only after that annihilation had been accomplished. And when the ambassador asked Mr. Palat about this, his response was, "Someday I will come and discuss the whole Armenian subject with you." And then he added in a low tone in Turkish, "But that day will never come." Moving on to the next charge of genocide under the Rome Statute is that he forcibly ordered the transfer of children to one group to another group. Evidence for this violation can be seen in the written documents from Mehmet Pasha, dated January 15, 1916, to the governor of Aleppo. It regards the survival of these children as detrimental. I recommend the orphanages not receive such children, and no attempts are to be made to establish special orphanages for them. And another, dated 1916, from the Minister of the Interior to the governor of Aleppo. Only those orphans who cannot remember the terrors to which their parents have been subjected must be collected and kept. Send the rest away with caravans. Now, it is because of this evidence, Your Honor, that we must find Mehmet Pasha guilty of Article 6 of A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of this group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole and in part, or E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Here are arguments and uphold justice here today. I'll now pass the podium to my partner who will explain the other charges.
Good afternoon. I'm trying to keep it short, they're pretty long, so sorry about that. Okay. So as she covered Article 6 itself and the counts that are held towards Mehmet Pasha. And I will cover the crimes against humanity under Article 7, and under Article 8 also the war crimes. So may you please support, Your Honor? My partner talked about the genocide, and I will talk about the war crimes and crimes against humanity. And then to begin, there are 6 counts of crimes against humanity under Article 7, A, B, C, D, and E, and H, that Mehmet Pasha is facing himself. Now, a charge of crimes against humanity under the Rome Statute, Article 7, states that either A, murder exists, and extermination exists, B, extermination exists, C, enslavement exists, D, deportation or forcible transfer of population exists, E, imprisonment exists, F, torture, ordered denial of food, supplies, or health care to the Armenians, or H, persecution against any identifiable group or collectivity on a political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, or religious group. Now, one of the best sources of material as evidence on this subject would be Mehmet Pasha's documented conversations with U.S. Ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Henry Morgenthau, as published in his 1918 book, Ambassador Morgenthau's Story. Now in this he states, suppose a few Armenians did betray you, Morgenthau said. Is that a reason for destroying a whole race? Is that an excuse for making innocent women and children suffer? Those things are inevitable, Talat replied. Now this remark to me was not so quite as illuminating as one which Talat made subsequently to a reporter of the Berliner Tageblatt, who asked him the same question. In that he states, "We have been reproached," he said. Now, according to this interviewer, for making no distinction between the innocent Armenians and the guilty, but that was utterly impossible, in view of the fact that those who are innocent today might be guilty tomorrow. Now, Morgenthau continues, stating, "One reason why Talat could not discuss this matter with me freely was because the member of the embassy staff who did the interpreting was himself an Armenian. Now, in the early part of August, therefore, he sent a personal messenger to me, asking if I could not see him alone. He said that he himself would provide the interpreter. Now, this was the first time that Talat had admitted that his treatment of the Armenians was a matter with which I had any concern. Now, the interview took place 2 days afterward. It so happened that since the last time I had visited Talat, he had shaved his beard. As soon as I came in, the burly minister began talking in his customary bantering fashion. On every one of these points, I had plenty of arguments in rebuttal. Now, Talat's first objection was merely an admission that the Armenians were more industrious and more able than the dull-witted and lazy Turks. Now, massacre as a means of destroying business competition was certainly an original conception. Now, his general charge that the Armenians were conspiring against Turkey and that they openly sympathized with the Turkey's enemies merely meant, when reduced to its original elements, that the Armenians were constantly appealing to the European powers to protect them against robbery, murder, and outrage. Now, the Armenian problem, like most race problems, was a result of centuries of ill treatment and injustice. There could be only one solution for it: the creation of an orderly system of government in which all citizens were to be treated upon an equality, and in which all offenses were to be punished as the acts of individuals and not of the peoples. Now, I argued for a long time along these similar lines. It is no use for you to argue, Talat replied. We have already disposed of 3/4 of the Armenians. There are none at all left in Bitlis, Van, and Erzurum. The hatred between the Turks and the Armenians is now so intense that we have got to finish them. For if we don't, they will plan the revenge. Now, Morgenthau replied, if you're not influenced by human consideration, then think of the material loss. With this, Talat replied, we have figured all that out, and we know that it will not exceed 5 million pounds. We do not worry about that. I have asked you to come here so as to let you know that our Armenian policy is absolutely fixed and that nothing can change it. We will not have the Armenians anywhere in Anatolia. They can live in the desert, but nowhere else. Now with this, Morgenthau said, I am confident that the whole history of the human race contains no such horrible episode as this. The great massacres and persecutions of the past seem almost insignificant when compared to the suffering of the Armenian race in 1950. Now, the Armenian Genocide was carried out by the Young Turk government of the Ottoman Empire from 1915 to 1916. 1.5 million Armenians were killed, out of a total of 2 million Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. The Armenian Genocide was masterminded by the Central Committee of the Young Turk Party, which was dominated by Mehmet Talat Pasha. Now, perhaps one of the most damning things Mehmet Talat Pasha ever said was his own words. In his autobiography, Talat stated, the deportation of the Armenians in some localities of the Greeks and in Syria of some of the Arabs were used inside and outside of the empire as a source of attack on the Turkish government. Now, first of all, I wish to inform the public that the rumors of deportation and assassination were exceedingly exaggerated. The Greeks and the Armenians, taking advantage of the ignorance of the American and European public of the Near Eastern situation and of the character of the Turks, used the deportation as a means of propaganda and painted it as best suited for their aim. In saying this, I do not mean to deny the facts. I desire only to eliminate the exaggerations and to relate the facts as they occur. Now, this is very rich in many aspects and a very clever argument to blame the victim for their own crime. Somehow the arrested were to blame for their very own arrest and subsequent murders. Now, Talat then goes on to state that there was another group who sincerely believed that the general interest of the community necessitated the punishment alike of those Armenians who massacred the guiltless Mohammedans and those who helped the Armenian bandits to endanger our national life. The Turkish elements here referred to were short-sighted, fanatic, and yet sincere in their belief. The public encouraged them, and they had the general approval behind them. They were numerous and strong. As to the deportation of the Greeks and the Armenians, this charge is based more on propaganda than on real fact. These preventive measures were taken in every country during the war. But while the regrettable results were passed over in silence in the other countries, the echo of our acts was heard the world over. So basically, Mehmet Talat Pasha's only justification for innocence is that the victims made the criminals attack them because they deserved it. Now, this is not accepted then, it is not acceptable now, and it is not acceptable forever. Now, the next 5 counts that he will be facing are under war crimes, which are under Article 8, which are A1, A2, A3, A4, and B2. Now, for the purpose of the statute, crimes against humanity means any of the following acts when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack. Now, for the purpose of the statute, war crimes means either A, a grave breach of the Geneva Convention of August 12, 1949, namely any of the following acts against persons or property. Either 1, willful killing, 2, torture or inhumane treatment, 3rd one, willfully causing great suffering, 4, extensive destruction and appropriation of property, Fifth, unlawful deportation or transfer or unlawful confinement. And under B, it would either be one, intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population or intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects. Now, evidence of war crimes that Mehmet Talal Pasha was involved in can easily be seen through his very own words. One of the best sources of material on this subject would be Mehmet Talal Pasha's documented conversations with U.S. Ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, Morgenthau, as published in his 1918 book, Ambassador Morgenthau's Story. In this, he said, "I had many talks with Talal on the Armenians, but I never succeeded in moving him to the slightest degree. He always came back to the points which he had made in the interview. He was very willing to grant any request I made on behalf of the Americans or even the French and English, but I could not obtain any general concession on the Armenians. Now, he seemed to me always to have the deepest personal feeling in this matter, and his antagonism to the Armenians seemed to increase as their sufferings increased. Now, one day discussing a particular Armenian, I told Talal that he was mistaken in regarding this man as an enemy of the Turks, that in reality he was their friend. Talal replied, "No Armenian can ever be our friend, and after what we have done to them." Now, one day Talal made what was perhaps the most astonishing request I have ever heard of. Though as early as May 1915, the Allied powers formally accused the Ottoman government of crimes against humanity. However, following World War I, France focused its outrage on Germany, while Russia lost all interest in bringing the young Turks to justice. The only country left to help was Britain, who took the massacre of the Armenians seriously during this time. In 1918, Britain had an occupying force of over 1 million soldiers who exerted extensive pressure on the post-war government. Furthermore, the developed British legal system wanted to hold individual members of the Ottoman leadership criminally responsible for war crimes. The first verdicts handed down by the tribunals found Major Tevfik Bey, commander of the Yozgat police, and Yozgat Lieutenant Governor Kemal Bey guilty of organizing deportations, murder, pillage, and robbery against crimes against humanity and civilization. Now, the court's martial continued against prominent leaders, including Said Halam Pasha, as well as those who had fled to Germany. At the same time, politics began destroying the domestic tribunals. The British Army's presence shrank, and they had to move and release some of their people who were in custody, and moved at least 68 of their most prominent prisoners to a detention center in Malta. Unfortunately, the British could not hold on any longer, and finally, the final straw came in August 1921 when Atatürk's nationalists took a group of 29 British hostages and demanded the release of Turkish prisoners who were detained in Malta jails. Now, all 50 remaining Turks in custody were subsequently freed. Now, had the war crime tribunals been held in Constantinople, but given the opportunity to uncover evidence and document high-level testimony, as was stipulated by the Treaty of Sevres, it would have been significantly more difficult for subsequent Turkish governments to deny the story or minimize Turkish culpability. Unlike Germany, whose Nazi-era leaders were held criminally responsible and punished, the Turkish Republic has never confronted the Armenian genocide. We started with a quote from Hillary Clinton on January 26, 2012, and we will end with a quote from Hillary, in which she states, "The horrible events perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire against the Armenians constitute a clear case of genocide." Thank you.
For our demonstration purposes, we didn't have the judges ask questions, but they would normally ask questions during that time, maybe 15 minutes, so you can kind of get the idea. But then they would reverse, and then they would be judges, it would be a third person, and then they would come over here. And we could do it easily video conferencing and or that. And we're scheduled to do some with Taiwan and the Ukraine and some other ones later on this fall. So that's going to be a pretty nice thing. In fact, I was going to actually show Cinder Cronin gave us a nice video a while back, and I was going to show that, but we didn't want to put any more politics. I had a Democrat and I ended with the Republican stuff, which I did pretty nice on that. We really appreciate you guys coming today. I think that it's really nice. Mirhan's brought some books about the promise. You might want to talk a little bit about that, Mirhan.
Yeah, so
and then they'd like to take some pictures.
In 2015, the movie The Promise came out, and if there's literature that goes along with it that helps in terms of education regarding the Armenian genocide. If someone has not seen the movie, you're welcome. I brought 4 copies of it. I've got about 30 more at home, so I'm happy to, I think I'm probably one of the bigger customers for having gotten the movie. And please feel free to take one of the movies and one of the packets if you'd like to learn a little more. Something very meaningful for me in that movie is the closing scene where a ship from France comes to rescue the Armenians that have been caught at the seaside. And my grandfather, my mother's father, had escaped Turkey, joined the French Foreign Legion, and was actually on that ship involved in the rescue, which is the closing scene of that movie.
It's based on the true story too, correct?
Yes, the Armenian Genocide.
No, I mean, no. No, I'm saying that.
When the judges do the questioning, is their role like a devil's
Yes,
advocate kind of
they would
role?
play the devil's advocate. In fact, Emily, why don't you come up here?
Is that, so they try to punch holes?
Yes, they'll try to punch holes, so they don't have to necessarily defend.
But that's why
genocide.
there's no defense.
Yeah, exactly right. So at this point, I'd like for them to, that would be the adversarial part. Okay, so Brissa, ask her a couple questions.
Council, after World War II, Germany underwent a series of programs known as today is what we call Americanization to sort of reset the mindset of the people. And to this, I'd like to bring the point that what good does it do if we are to recognize the genocide if the Turkey people continue to deny it? How do we help the Armenians in that case? So what would be the benefit of recognizing it?
Your Honor, the benefit of recognizing this horror is the fact that if we do not, it would happen again. This is seen in the fact that Adolf Hitler thought he was justified in doing so because he saw it done before with the Armenians.
Thank you, Council.
Okay, have a seat. Freddie, why don't you come up here? Lance, want to ask Freddie a question?
So in your speech earlier about the Armenian genocide, when you go over a very peculiar thing about, in fact, even my co-judge said it earlier about how Hitler said that no one remembers the Armenian genocide. How can you be so sure about the Turkey's allegations being just that, allegations about this kind of thing, and not their side of the story?
Well, of course, both sides are going to provide their own side of the story, but sometimes as Talat himself said in one of his own autobiographies, sometimes things are exaggerated, and the own side of the Turkey, or the own Turks themselves could have exaggerated at some point, and altered the facts. And we have to make sure that we can equally look at both sides and see which one has more justification and actually holds truth in what they are saying.
Okay, now, one thing that we got to remember is that when you have two diametrically opposed things, it's very interesting, and I think somebody's going to hear this maybe later tonight, but I think education is actually complicit in this. We as educators very rarely even train people to know anything about geography. And Turkey's gotten by with saying that, on Bloody Sunday, which was 104 years ago right now as we speak, they were taking people from Constantinople. And their argument was, we are relocating them from the front. As far as I know, Constantinople was established by my grandfather a long time ago, Constantine. It's between Europe and Asia. The front was over in Eastern Anatolia. They were not taking people from the front. They were taking people to die in the middle of the desert. Then they use it, but they could get by with that because people are, don't pay any attention. This is one thing that is very important. When Lance asked the question, I just wanted to jump in because I was eager to jump in, is that we really need to step up our game a little bit about educating people, not just about just the genocide itself, but some of these egregious things that they are saying, because they're not factually even the case. And also, if you go back and think, the Ottoman Turks came from Mongolia. Anatolia is the name of, is not Turkey. The Ottomans are just a figment of imagination that has been there for not even near as long as the Armenians that are actually homeland. At one time, in around 70 BC, Armenia controlled almost all of Anatolia. This is a very strange people fact. The Ottoman Empire lasted from 1299 to 1922. And then it fell apart. And since Ataturk took over, yesterday was actually International Child's Day, according to Turkey. They had the celebration right before the genocide. I thought that was a kind of an interesting thing. And we do a lot of communication with Turkey, but I've never been able to, and I have a lot of friends who are Turkish. And and we cannot discuss this at all, because we actually were going to at one time, and they shut us down on the video conference. She could probably be arrested, and I didn't want that to happen. But this is very sad. I think that's the essence of the question, is that we really need to get the facts out there, and then you make up your own mind. But if you're going to try to say that we're taking people from the front when it's way over here, if I'm fighting over at Bastrop and I'm taking people from Westlake, that's not Bastrop, and that's basically the geographic thing is what's happening here. And it's all Austin, so we don't pay any attention. We do appreciate your time. I know you taking out this time, but I think it's so important. I'm so excited about showcasing some of our kids' talent, and I'm very excited about everybody that participated today. If we could have a group picture or something, that would be kind of neat to remember this class. Everybody can come up here.
I'm impressed how well prepared these guys are. That's quite impressive.
Yeah, they don't. And they would try, and if we were doing this competitively, they would try to stump the people. Okay, so this is actually.
They don't see what they're going to say. They don't know that beforehand.
No, it would be just like a courtroom. You're not going to. We would do it. It's very, very high level. You have to pay attention during the time, and then it would have to be, and then you could actually establish. And it would be kind of neat, and you wouldn't have to have a burden in the idea of genocide, which I think is offensive. But you could do it for any group. In fact, we have some set up for, and then we got Senator Cronin's office. We've been trying to do this for a long time, but this is probably the most active. So the other rounds. Well, we could actually travel, or you could do like. I'm big into distance recovery. Been doing it for like 15 years.
But I mean, in terms of these students.
These students, yeah, they all actually, we travel and we've gone to different schools to do it.
But you haven't hosted.
No, we hadn't hosted it, but we're on the fall. Yeah.
That's Christian. Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you for having us. Thank you so much for coming out today. Appreciate it.